verses 14 through 19. And I'll let you be seated. 2 Chronicles 36, starting with verse 14. Moreover, all the chief of the priests and the people transgressed very much after all the abominations of the heathen, and polluted the house of the Lord, which he had hallowed in Jerusalem. The Lord God of their fathers sent warnings to them over and over again by his messengers, because he had compassion on his people and his dwelling place. But they continued to jest regarding the messengers of God, despising his word and making fun of his prophets, until the wrath of the Lord came up against his people, until there was no remedy. So he brought up against him the king of the Chaldeans from Babylon, who killed their young men with sword at the house of their sanctuary. I'm reading out of the modern English version, so it's going to be a little different. He did not spare a young man or virgin, old or age. God gave all of them into his hand. Verse 18 says, even all the vessels of the house of God, both large and small, and the treasures of the house of the Lord, the king and his officials. And all of this was taken to Babylon. So they burned down the house of God, tore down the walls of Jerusalem, burned down all the palaces with fire, and destroyed all the precious items. Look back with me, if you would, to verse 16. But they continued to jest regarding the messengers of God, despising his word and making fun of his prophets, until the wrath of the Lord came up against his people, until there was, and it says these last two words in the King James as well, no remedy. And that's what I want to preach this morning for a little while on that thought. No remedy. You can be seated. In chapter 36 here, we have recorded for us the tragic story of the death of a nation. A nation that was one time nourished by God. And give you an outline, we first find their deadly illness, if you would, where they had removed God from their hearts, from the heart and the center of their national life. But at the birth of the nation, it was completely centered around God. The tabernacle was at the center of the camp, and each man was conscious of his own responsibility and own relationship to God. But they had forsaken the fountain of living waters. And then we go into their symptoms, where they increased the false gods, and they sought for truth and peace apart from God or apart from Jehovah. During this time, astrology became very popular. It was popularized. And during this time, altars were built for the false gods. And there was continual strife throughout the land. And then we find God's attempts to cure them and to bring them back to him. He sent prophets to them. The prophets called for them to come back to Jehovah, and they assured them of God's mercy, and they assured them of God's forgiveness. And they warned the people of the impending judgment if they refused to return to God. And they warned of the impending invasion and eventual destruction of the land. But the prophets, instead of being received, they were mocked. Their messages was rejected, and the prophets themselves were even abused. They were imprisoned. They were stoned. And some believe this is where Isaiah, though the Bible doesn't record this, but this is where Isaiah lost his life, by being cut in half. But God was patient, and God was long-suffering, and he gave them chance after chance after chance. But then we read finally where God's diagnosis was really, there was no remedy. The people failing to respond to every effort of God and to bring them back to himself. and they chose their own course of destruction. These people would not trust God, but they would rather trust in themselves, and they refused God's strength, and they chose to rely on their own strength. They closed their ears to the prophets of God, and they chose to listen to the comforting or the soothing words of the lying prophets. And the results are predictable. God warned them in his word that in Proverbs he said that he that being often reproved hardeneth his neck shall suddenly be destroyed. But they took that final, fatal step where they went beyond the point of no return. They had mistaken God's patience as approval. They had mistaken his long suffering as weakness. And they even rationalized to themselves, how could a God of love punish us? And to the heartbreak of God, destruction came. And we know that the word says that God is not willing that any should perish. He cried to them to turn from your ways and turn from them and turn back to me or you're going to die. And we know the Lord has no pleasure in the death of the wicked. But here each man who was ever lost one day took that step beyond the point of no return, where God said and he declared no remedy. You know, I think the most terrifying, fateful words that a person can hear is there's no remedy, or there's nothing we can do for you. You've not been feeling well, and you finally go to the doctor, and he puts you through a large amount of tests, a big series of tests, and he finally calls you and he informs you that you waited too long to come and visit him, that you better set your house in order because you have a problem from which there is no remedy. That is a tragic day when you hear those words that come from a doctor. There is no remedy. But it's far worse when God declares a person or a nation that they have gone too far, that there is no remedy. And that is exactly what our text is talking about here when it mentions Judah, or it declares about Judah. Read in verse 14, 15, and 16 again. It says, moreover, all the chief of the priests and the people transgressed very much after all the abominations of the heathen, and polluted the house of the Lord, which he allowed, or which he had hallowed in Jerusalem. And the Lord God of their fathers sent to them his messengers over and over, because he had compassion on his people and his dwelling place. But they mocked the messengers, despised his words, and misused his prophets, until the wrath of the Lord rose against his people, till there was no remedy. Now I'm going to attempt right now to read a poem to you. I don't know if you've ever tried to read a poem and really do it justice. It's kind of hard sometimes. But I'm going to attempt to read one to you now. Dr. Addison Alexandra wrote, there is a time we know not, when a point we know not where, that marks the destiny of men to glory or despair. There is a line by us unseen that crosses every path, the hidden boundary between God's patience and his wrath. To pass that limit is to die as if by stealth. It does not quenching the beaming eye or pale the glow of hell. The conscience may be still at ease, the spirit's light and gay. That which is pleasing still may please, and care be thrust away. But on that forehead God has set indelibly a mark, unseen by man, for man as yet is blind and in the dark. And yet the doomed man's path below may bloom as Eden bloomed. He did not, does not, will not, or feel that he is doomed. He knows, he feels that all is well, and every fear is calm. He lives, he dies, he wakes in hell, not only doomed, but damned. Oh, where is that mysterious bourne by which our path is crossed, beyond which God himself had sworn that he who goes is lost? How far may we go in sin? How long will God forbear? Where does hope end, and where begin the confines of despair? An answer from the skies is sent, yet that from God depart, while it is called today, repent, and harden not your heart. Judah had crossed over that line. They had gone too far. They had gone so far, Brother Danny, that there was no remedy. And the writer gives us the list of deadly symptoms. The chief priests and the people had transgressed very much after the abomination of the heathen. We read that they worshiped Ashtaroth, and she was the goddess of sex that really was after those type of idols. And they worshiped Molech, and Molech was the god of pleasure. They worshiped Baal, which was the god of intellect. And they worshiped Mammon, the god of power and possessions. And that is where they absorbed the pleasures and I don't want to say that with all the children here, but their material possessions. There was no time and there was no place for God in their lives. We also read that they polluted the house of the Lord, and they went to the house of the Lord, but their hearts and their minds were elsewhere. We still read that the Lord had still compassion on them because he sent the messengers to warn them. And one of the messengers that he sent was Jeremiah. And Jeremiah tells how the Lord sent him to the temple and to cry to the people who were coming to worship. In Jeremiah chapter 7 and verse 1, it says, "This is the word that came to Jeremiah from the Lord, saying, Stand in the gate of the Lord's house and proclaim there this word, and say, Hear the word of the Lord, all Judah that enter in at the gates to worship the Lord. Thus saith the Lord of hosts and God of Israel, Amend your ways and your doings, and I will cause you to dwell in this place. Trust not in the lying words, saying, This is the temple of the Lord. The temple of the Lord, the temple of the Lord." And what that is saying there is believing that just because you're still going to the temple, that everything is okay. Jeremiah 7 and 5 says, though, For if you will thoroughly amend your ways and your doings, if you will thoroughly execute judgment between a man and his neighbor, if you will not oppress the stranger, the fatherless, and the widow, and you will not shed blood, innocent blood in this place, neither walk after other gods to your hurt, then will I cause you to dwell forever in this place that I gave to your fathers. Behold, you are trusting in lying words that cannot profit. Will ye steal, murder, commit adultery, swear falsely, burn incense unto Baal, and walk after gods whom you know not, and then come and stand before me in this house, who is called by my name, and say, We are free to do all these abominations? Is this house, which is called by my name, become a den of robbers in your eyes? Behold, I have seen, saith the Lord. But go now into my place which was in Shiloh, where I first set my name, and see what I did to it for the wickedness of my people Israel. And now, because you have done all these works, saith the Lord, I spoke to you, rising up early and speaking, but you would not hear. And I called you, but you would not answer. Therefore I will do to this house, which is called by my name, wherein ye trust, and unto the place which I gave you and your fathers, as I have done to Shiloh. And I will cast you out of my sight, as will cast all your brethren, even all the descendants of Ephraim. Verse 16 of Jeremiah 7 says, the Lord then commanded Jeremiah, do not pray for these people. Do not cry or pray for them. Do not make intercession to me, for I will not hear you. They had gone too far. There was no remedy. They were religious, but they were not spiritual. They had crossed over the line. And tragically, we have read that they mocked the messengers of God and despised his words and misused his prophets until the wrath of the Lord rose against the people, till there was no remedy. We just read that God even commanded Jeremiah not to pray for their good any longer. Can I tell you that I believe that there is more hope for a man that says that he is an atheist than for a man who says he believes in God, yet lives as though God does not exist. Never takes time to talk with God. Never takes time to walk with God. Never takes God into consideration before making decisions. God really has no part in your life or in his life. And the condition of Judah, it was not that they no longer believed in God. And I think that if you would took a poll then, that you would find that probably 95% or more actually believed in God. But they no longer glorified him as the Lord. There was no place for God in their lives. They had so many other gods that was before them. Can I tell you that your God is revealed by the primary interest that is in your life, such as your worldly possessions. All these things that you put ahead of God. Instead of coming to church when we have church. Instead of coming to prayer meeting when we have prayer meeting. Instead of coming and getting on the conference call on Monday nights or the Zoom on Wednesday nights. All these other things all of a sudden is all before God. They're more important than God. I urge you this morning, don't find yourself to the part where God says there is no remedy. That there's no chance. You have put these things ahead of me for so long. You say you love me. You say you worship me. You do this and you do that. But yet I have no part in your life. When it comes time to make decisions, you just make the decision. You don't pray before you make the decision. You don't have a second thought about missing church to go to a party or go do something else. Don't find yourself where God says there is no remedy. Paul warned that the wrath of God would be revealed from heaven against all the ungodliness. Notice that Judah were not denying the existence of God. They still held to the truth of God, but they were holding it in unrighteousness. And that's a very, very dangerous place to be in. because that place becomes a place of great deception. As the poem declared, and yet the doomed man's path below may bloom as Eden bloomed. He did not, does not, will not know or feel that he is doomed. He knows, he feels that all is well, and every fear is calmed. He lives, he dies, he wakes in hell, not only doomed, but damned. You see, they were still going to the temple. Thus they felt a sense of spiritual security. But outwardly they were doing the right things, but inwardly they were worshiping other gods. And God was looking at their hearts. And as I get ready to close, I want to ask you today, you're here outwardly, but where is your heart? You're here, I can count you as a number, but where is your heart? How much have you actually given to God this morning? Or how much have you been worried about everything that's going around you and being distracted from this one or that one? You're here in number, but where is your heart? You're here to say that I went to church this morning. But how about your heart? Where is it at this morning? Man may be looking on you this morning with admiration because they see you here in church. But as God is looking at your heart, what does He see this morning? What does He see this morning? He sees all the other gods that we have in our life. He sees all the other gods that you love and have allowed to replace Him in your heart. Ezekiel was another one of those messengers that God had sent to him. We read in Ezekiel chapter 8, verse 8, Then said the Lord unto me, Son of man, dig now in the wall. And when I had dug in the wall, behold, there was a door. And He said unto me, Go in, and behold the wickedness, or the wicked abominations that they were doing in there. So Ezekiel said he went in and saw. And behold, I saw all the idols of the house of Israel portrayed upon the wall about me. And there stood before them 70 men of ancients of the house of Israel. And in the midst of them stood Jezaniah, the son of Shaphan. And every man his censer in his hand, and a thick cloud of incense went up. And in Ezekiel 8, verse 12, Then he said unto me, Son of man, have you seen what the ancients of the house of Israel do in the dark? Every man in the chambers of his imagination. For they say, The Lord seeth us not. The Lord hath forsaken the earth. God allowed Ezekiel, and He showed Ezekiel the other abominations that they were committing. Then God said, They provoked me to anger. Therefore, I will deal with them with fury. My eye shall not spare, neither will I have pity. And though they cry in my ears with a loud voice, yet will I not hear them. Because you see, they had crossed over the line. At this point, there was no remedy. How close are you to that line today? Only God knows. But it's very possible that some of you hearing, or you may be here this morning, it's very possible that you're hearing God's final call to you today. No, I'm not trying to scare anyone. But it's now or never. Because we're not promised anything. We walk out these doors. But think about this. One more rejection of His grace. And God could declare, there's no remedy. There's no remedy. In the book of Hebrews, we're asked the question, how can we escape if we neglect great salvation? Escape what? The judgment of God, the fiery indignation of His wrath that will be poured out upon those who have trodden under their foot the Son of God and counted the blood of His covenant as worthless. It's a fearful thing to fall into the hands of a living God. Would you stand this morning? Where do you stand with God this morning? Are you here this morning to truly give everything you got to God? Maybe you're here this morning to try to ease your conscience or ease your mind, to say that I was in church. But where's your heart with God? Well, later today when Brother Stewart calls the pastor and tells him everybody that was here and how many we had, at least my name will be mentioned that I was in church. Can I tell you, if that's your thought process this morning, if you came to church just to ease your mind or ease your conscience and you haven't prayed, you haven't worshiped like you're supposed to, can I tell you that you're at the very line of there's no remedy? Yes. Where is your walk with God right now? Is it just getting by? Is it trying to get away with everything that you can get away with and still hold on to that religious part? You could be standing and about to cross the line of no remedy. I'm going to open these altars and I ask you to be mindful of what we talked about earlier. But if you want to be honest with yourself this morning and say, Brother Stewart, I'm not where I need to be with God. We've missed a whole lot of church, and for one, and we all had good reasons that we missed. And some of us prayed, and some of us worshiped at home, and some of us have, studied our Bible, and we've tried to get closer to God. But then there may be some that hasn't even picked up their Bible. Maybe there's some that hadn't prayed hardly any until they needed something. Are you using God? Or are you letting God use you? If you feel like this morning that you have let yourself slide, you haven't done all you needed to do for God. Maybe there's been days, maybe there's been weeks, God forbid, but you haven't really talked to God other than in passing. I invite you this morning, as Sister Melissa begins to sing this song, I invite you this morning to kneel at these altars and come stand at the front and say, God, I'm going too far from you. I need to get back where I used to be. I need to get away from the crossing this line of no remedy. If that's you this morning, would you make your way to the front? Say, Lord, I need to get closer to you. Lord, I'm straying so far, but now I need to make my way back. God, I don't want to cross that line of no remedy. Oh, I failed so miserably, God. But I want to get closer to you today, Lord. Forgive me, Lord. Draw me closer to you, God. God, let me heed to your warning this morning. Let me heed to your pulling and your drawing this morning. Oh, yes, Jesus. Don't let me, Lord. Oh, don't let me walk too far from Calvary. Draw me back this morning, Lord. Draw me back this morning, oh Lord. Oh, hallelujah, hallelujah. Oh, yes, Jesus. Come on, is that your cry this morning? Don't let me walk too far from Calvary. Or maybe this morning you felt that you've already walked too far. But you're given that chance to walk back now. You're given that chance to come back. Oh, yes, Jesus. Hallelujah, hallelujah. That's why I pray. That's why I pray. Don't let me stray. Don't let me stray. If you can right now, you're standing here at this front, and everybody across the building, if you can raise your hand or raise one hand. Hey God, here I am. I want to get your attention, God. Don't let me stray too far from Calvary, oh God. Oh, hallelujah. Oh, don't hear the words, no remedy. Oh, hallelujah. Thank you, Jesus.